YouTube. Welcome back to the Allegheny Northern in N scale. Today we're going behind the layout to one of the probably least exciting parts of the layout, and that is the Helix. Now when I say least exciting, you may say, well, why is it not exciting? That's because it's something that very few visitors to the layout will ever actually see. It is a necessary evil to reach the upper deck of the layout. So right now here's hidden staging and all of the trains and locomotives waiting for a home. And then of course you've seen from other videos that I do have a start of something on the other side as far as an upper level. The upper layer is going to be three key scenes. One is a coal mine, the second is a giant harbor, and the third is a small industrial area with a lot of switching potential. So in order to access that approximately 15 inches above the existing deck, there wasn't a real good way to do it other than a helix. Now, some people love helixes, some people hate helixes. I personally am not a huge fan. So I figured I would do a video of the pros and cons and show you how I did mine. And hopefully it gives you some sort of guidance if you're thinking of one for yourself. Okay, first thing is first. I had the luxury of being able to come off of the layout at one of the highest points on the lower deck. So I was already at an elevation much higher than some of the other parts of the layout by about 3 or 4 inches. The next step was that I needed to get to a space where I could actually install the Helix. So that gave us this little run right here. And then of course, I'm sure you recognize the Woodland Scenics risers underneath it. And that just gets us to the point where the Helix takes over, which is right about here. Okay. So I use Cable Unit Track because it keeps a very nice uniform radius all the way up. Some things to consider when you're doing a Helix. One is you are trying to maximize the run. So the more gradual the curve, the more track per curve, the less the incline. The next thing you're trying to do is minimize this right here. You want more loops and minimal amount of space. So here's how I did mine. First of all, I went to Home Depot or Lowe's, one of the big box stores, and I picked up some of this fairly small all thread hanger rod, whatever you want to call it. And basically all it is a piece of metal that it's exactly what it says. It's all threaded, so you can run bolts from one end to the other seamlessly. And then of course picked up some bolts and some washers. And that's a typical detail right there. Washer on the top, washer on the bottom, bolt holding everything together. Now, why did I do that? First of all, that gives me 100% adjustability. So I can, by moving the washers, 2 on each side, I can adjust this up, down. I can tilt it if I want to do, some elevations into the curves. I can do all sorts of fun things now with 100% adjustability. So that's why I use all thread, and I'd recommend you do the same. Now, one thing I will tell you is if you look at the top here, I've got 4 sets. So they are at the tangent points of my helix, of my circle. That is not enough points. As I learned, I probably could have easily had at least 2 more all thread connection details. Here, probably would have moved those ones a little closer and run it through. To do it all over again, I would probably definitely have more connection points. The other thing that I would have done is I might have used a little bit thicker lumber to keep it a little bit more rigid in between. You'll notice that there's a few places where I have used some helpers, some spacers. They're not glued in place right now, they're just sort of sitting there. The luxury of N scale is that you do not have to have things perfect as far as that sort of thing goes, because the weight that you're putting on it is not very much. So this actually, it holds up very, very well. And then I joined my pieces with mending plates. The downside is you have screws that come through at the bottom. You can cut these off if you want to. But once again, this is not a part of the layout that anybody but me is ever going to see. This is not a part that I'm ever going to showcase. And
quite frankly, it is, like I said, a necessary evil. Okay, so let's talk about the cons of a Helix. And first of all, first con is it's not realistic. So you're not going to have this somewhere on the layout where it's visible because nowhere in real life does a train spin around, around, around to get to another elevation. Um, there are various locations. We can use horseshoe curve as one where railroads have done some creative things to change elevations, yes, but no one's ever done this. So you're going to hide it. It is a lot of track that is kind of fancy and wasted because you never see it. Okay, it is also a source of potential derailment. What I have noticed is heavier trains. They do actually require helper units to be able to function properly on this. So that is a downside. The other thing is space. They take up an absolute ton of space. This is a fairly small Helix. It could have been larger. Definitely have the space to make it larger. But quite frankly, I don't want to have to do the woodworking again. It's a pain in the butt. While we're talking about woodworking, let's talk about the waste of material. Because you're dealing with all curves, you have to lay these pieces out and cut them. You're cutting curved segments out of a rectangle. You get an amazing amount of waste. No matter how you flip the pieces, you're doing a lot of cutting, you're doing a lot of stitching together. It's just, they're not fun to build. You can get pre-built kits, and I do recommend that as an alternative. If you don't feel like breaking out the jigsaw and wasting an afternoon cutting out somewhat circular pieces. Okay, let's talk about the pros. First of all, it does get you to a higher elevation in a amount of space that is much better than if you had to run it at a standard grade of, let's say, 2%, which would be absolutely disastrous trying to get end scale up a 2% grade for any length of distance. Especially if you're going like I am at about 14, 15 inches. Okay, the next thing. So it does help you out in that regards. The next thing is, realistically, you're going to run your trains fairly slow up these things, especially if you're, say, pulling a very heavy coal drag. So you do have a long run, which the train goes through, and if your Helix is like mine off stage, then it looks like the train has disappeared from your layout and has disappeared, takes some time, and then reappears in another city some distance later. So the length of time increasing the amount of run is helping you in two ways. One, it's getting your train up the elevation that you need to, and two, it's adding distance between stops. So I have effectively added length of run between my power plant and my coal mine. After that, there's not a whole lot of exciting features unless you start getting crazy. Now, if you are running DCC, this opens up a world of opportunities for you from operational standpoint. What I mean by that is, right now, these two locomotives will handle these 16 cars, which are in good running order, good couplers, good wheel sets, no problem up this grade. But a longer train, it might be worthwhile to add some helper service. So, if you have the space on either side of your Helix, you can add helper pockets and introduce helper service to your locomotives and to your trains. Now, what I will tell you is that if you are going to do helper service, you probably want to be running DCC. Why? Because you're going to need to speed match your locomotives. If your locomotives are not speed matched, you're going to have your locomotives fighting, pushing and pulling on the train. So if you have any locomotives that are mid-train or rear-train helpers, they are going to cause you major derailments on your Helix. Not ideal. So definitely think about that when you're planning your layout. If you're running DC, standard cab control, I'd skip the helpers. If you're running DCC, make sure a couple of things. One, you speed match your locomotives. Two, make sure your cars are in good running order. Make sure your couplers are in good order. Highly recommend that you body mount everything, but if you don't have body mount, as these Kato units are not body mounted. As long as you're running at fairly slow speeds, you can pretty much make this happen, as you can see. Okay. One thing I skipped on the building of these all threads. So how did I determine this elevation? Very simple. I took the highest car that I had running on the layout, which was my Kato, whatever you want to call it, double stack cars. For some reason, these cars sit way higher than some of the other ones, even higher than the articulated and standard auto racks. And I ran the train at very slow speed, backwards and forwards, and I adjusted each of these levels at my 4 screw locations until I had just enough clearance underneath each of the levels for the train to pass. At that point, I realized I had these decks as small as they could possibly go, set to the highest possible car that will ever run up them, and there we are. So now I have my functional Helix, and I was able to adjust each of these levels to the lowest possible grade that the cars could handle, and here we are. So as our train climbs up to the top of the Helix, you can see it's effective, it works, and it's adding minutes to the run. Now don't forget, as you're adding minutes to the run, your train is missing. It is missing from the layout. So if your layout is on the other side of a drywall wall, it gets a little nerve-wracking because you don't quite know where it is, what's happening to it. For me, what I planned on doing was using my Helix in conjunction with my hidden staging yard. So once trains would leave the main layout, the main stage, and come up the Helix, now they're working in staging back here, getting ready to go out to the second level of the layout. So I extended the loco net back here so that I can do that behind the scenes work and get the train ready to go. So right here we see our train is just about reaching the top here. Not exciting. I've got this set right now at a throttle speed of 17. When it's not on grade, it's not going much faster than it is right here now. That speed doesn't mean a whole ton because these locomotives that I have here for some reason are geared pretty slow, but they as I reach the top here, I am going to stop it because I do not have any space available in my yard for this train to go to. So that, pros and cons of the Helix. For me, it was a necessary evil. I did not necessarily enjoy the build. It's kind of an ugly little thing back here, but it does serve the purpose that it was built for, and that is to get my train from the main deck 15 inches higher to the upper deck. So I hope this helped you out. If you have any questions on how I did it, why I did it, any of the parts and pieces that I used, feel free to leave me a comment and I will respond.